Tanks have dominated land warfare since before World War II. Today, the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies have a vastly superior number of tanks available for combat than have the NATO forces. The United States Army is considering several means to counter this threat. One of the most promising is the attack helicopter, a concept which had its origin in the early 1950s, when forward thinkers in the Army experimented by mounting machine guns on observation helicopters to deliver fire against point targets. These helicopters were later employed in teams to perform as scouts. Their tactics were to pop up from behind masking terrain, fire their weapons, then disappear again behind the masks. Soon rockets were added to these scout helicopters to provide suppressive fire over a larger area. Then, to increase the volume of this suppressive fire, rockets were placed on cargo and utility helicopters. The range of these rockets enabled the helicopters to fire and then break off their attack to avoid overflying the target. In the late 50s, the Army mounted wire-guided anti-tank missiles on the helicopter and investigated their use against armor. Throughout this era, a continuing concern was the survivability of the helicopter. It still had to prove itself in combat. The United States' involvement in the Vietnam conflict heralded the first use of armed helicopters in actual combat. The newly developed UH-1A helicopter, called the Huey, armed with fixed-position machine guns, was selected to escort the troop-carrying helicopters. These gunships initially operated at low level, but the fixed position of their machine guns made it necessary to climb to altitude in order to fire effectively. Because the landing zones were frequently beyond the range of friendly artillery, rocket pods were installed on the Hueys to provide suppressive fire prior to the landing of the troop carriers. The armed Hueys would orbit the landing zone continually while the troop carriers were landing and departing. This role rapidly expanded. Operating in teams, the helicopters began to provide supporting fires for ground forces. Improved rocket warheads and rapid-fire, flexibly mounted machine guns on later models of the Huey permitted the helicopter to deliver even more accurate fire while staying out of range of enemy ground fire. It soon became evident that the hours of darkness belonged to the enemy. So clusters of airplane landing lights were mounted on helicopters, enabling them to illuminate areas at night. Accompanying these light ships, known as Fireflies, were blacked-out armed Hueys which engaged any enemy sighted. The success of these modified helicopters gave rise to the Army's requirement for a full-time attack helicopter. The state-of-the-art, however, could not yet provide what the Army wanted. So it settled for an interim attack helicopter in the form of an improved Huey. During this period, the 11th Air Assault Division at Fort Benning, Georgia, was evaluating various tactics and techniques for using the helicopter. Many of its tactics had already been adopted by the helicopter units in Vietnam. With the redesignation of this unit as the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile and its subsequent deployment to Vietnam came a new era in helicopter employment. For the first time, large units were organized around the mobility and firepower of the helicopter. This division combined scout helicopters and gunships into teams. The small observation helicopter operated on the treetops, searching for the enemy, while the armed helicopter remained at altitude, ready to engage any targets detected by the scouts. It introduced the use of the armed helicopter as an extension of conventional artillery. One of these heavily armed helicopters could deliver firepower equivalent to a one-round volley by a 105 artillery battalion. This helicopter was a mobile observation post, fire direction center, and gun position all in one, ready to respond to all requests. In 1967, a slimmed-down version of the Huey called the AH-1G Cobra was introduced in Vietnam. This was the first helicopter designed specifically as an aerial weapons platform. The introduction of the OH-6 light observation helicopter at about this same time provided the Army with a new, small, agile aircraft to perform the low-flying scout role. This machine, when coupled with the Cobra, made a team that was a formidable adversary for the Viet Cong. The tactics of employment of the attack helicopter in Vietnam evolved primarily as a result of the weapons systems available and the nature of the enemy threat. In Vietnam, the Army learned that even an armed helicopter operating alone and with unvarying tactics was vulnerable to enemy ground fire. So they operated in teams for mutual support and varied their mode of operation. The Army learned that to effectively combat the enemy, its helicopters must have a near all-weather, day and night capability. It learned the most effective employment of the helicopter in low-intensity combat was at an altitude of 1,200 feet, where it was least vulnerable to ground fire and its weapons were most effective. The less expensive, more agile light observation helicopter could effectively locate targets for the hard-hitting gunships. Above all, the Army learned that the helicopter could survive in a very hostile environment. The success of the helicopter in Vietnam convinced the Army that it should consider seriously the question of whether or not the helicopter could be effectively employed in an anti-tank role. The Army began a systematic and exhaustive series of investigations into the use of helicopters against an armored threat in a mid-intensity conflict. Bits and pieces of information began to emerge. Much of what was learned was only common sense, but never before had the Army so exhaustively analyzed tactics, techniques, and weapons. It found that helicopters could routinely evade enemy detection and engagement by flying at altitudes below 15 meters. It could determine the probability of achieving first-round hits with various missiles. It discovered that engaging the enemy from the maximum range of the helicopter weapons reduced the attack helicopter effectiveness only slightly, but increased survivability nearly 5 times. It found that attack helicopters could acquire and engage more targets in less time when employed with other means of detection, such as observation helicopters, dismounted observers, or ground troops. It found that adequate weather conditions would exist in Europe for the attack helicopter to accomplish its mission, an average of 343 days a year. Data emerging from these efforts convinced the Army that a properly designed attack helicopter could be used effectively as a tank killer in a sophisticated mid-intensity combat environment. Advancing technology now permitted the development of the AH-56 Cheyenne, a true attack helicopter with a variety of firepower, the speed to get where needed, when needed, and the agility to take full advantage of the terrain. Along with the development of a prototype attack helicopter, the Army set about to perfect the tactics that it would employ. It reviewed all of the previous studies, war games, and field experiments pertaining to the attack helicopter and came up with a more advanced set of tactics. First, using scout helicopters to enhance the survivability of the attack helicopter by providing target location, direction of attack, firing positions, and holding areas, thus reducing exposure of the attack helicopters. Second, maximizing the use of cover and concealment to avoid the enemy's electronic and visual acquisition means. Third, engaging the enemy from outside the effective range of his weapons. These tactics were then played in a two-sided war game. This war game reaffirmed the idea that the attack helicopter, judiciously used by a ground commander in coordination with his other weapons, can be a decisive weapon on the modern battlefield. The Army was not content to rely solely on analytical deductions. At its instrumented range in California, a field experiment is being conducted under simulated combat conditions to further evaluate tactics, vulnerability, and survivability. Currently available U.S. Scout helicopters distinctively marked to aid in identification are employed in varying combinations with present-day attack helicopters. Unfortunately, the Cheyenne is not available for this test. It is therefore necessary to use the Cobra, even though it does not have the Cheyenne's superior capabilities. These teams are pitted against an attacking enemy armored column equipped with radar and visually directed air defense systems and supported by scout helicopters. Both sides are supported by close air support aircraft. Actions of participants are recorded using event entry devices and time-synchronized tape recordings of radio transmissions. Mounted on the attack helicopters and the enemy anti-aircraft weapons are cameras which are activated when the weapons are fired. Although no live ammunition is fired, the film from these cameras assists in determining successful engagements. Radar and range measuring systems record the location of participants. On a typical trial of the field experiment, the helicopter pilots are briefed about the operation. At the same time, the enemy ground forces are being briefed on their area of operations. On this particular day, the combination of aircraft used is 1 Scout and 2 attack helicopters. The scout helicopter precedes the attack helicopters into the operational area, searching for the enemy tanks. The scout pilot notes likely holding areas for the attack helicopters, which would mask them from the enemy's view. Upon detecting an enemy column, the scout pilot notifies the attack helicopters, giving target location, recommended areas from which to engage the enemy, and the direction and approximate range to the target. The scout helicopter continues to monitor the target. As the attack helicopters move forward. As the attack helicopters approach their attack positions, the scout helicopter moves to where it can observe for enemy aircraft, air defense weapons, and additional targets. Concurrently, the enemy radar detects helicopter activity in the area and alerts the anti-aircraft defenses in the column. Meanwhile, the attack helicopters, using the range and direction provided by the scout, prepare to engage the enemy from behind masking terrain, rising only enough to see the target. As the pilot of one attack helicopter sights the enemy, he transmits what he sees to the time-sequenced recorder. When the simulated missile is launched, the gun camera is activated. With the current aerial weapon systems, the attack helicopter must remain exposed until its missile impacts. Meanwhile, the enemy anti-aircraft crew has sighted the helicopter as it crested the hill. The gun camera photographs the helicopter and records the time of engagement. Subsequent analysis of the recorded data will reveal the outcome of this engagement. Missions are repeated using different crews, tactics, terrain, and combinations of aircraft. As the experiment progresses, additional data will be generated, permitting further evaluation of the tactics used. The final results of this experiment will be incorporated in later and larger field tests in the United States and Europe, evaluating the newest equipment and the latest ideas in Army units. The Army has learned a lot about how to use the helicopter in combat. It has conducted studies, war games, field experiments and tests, recorded the results, and checked the conclusions. This is the process, taking what it has already learned, using the equipment that it has now to simulate advanced equipment of the future. The Army develops the doctrine, tactics, and techniques necessary to counter the most sophisticated threat of a future enemy. The Soviet Army, together with its Warsaw Pact allies, represents the largest mechanized ground force in the world today. They are capable of mounting large-scale offensive operations on fronts extending from Denmark in the north to Italy in the south. NATO capability to defend against this force has raised questions concerning both tactics and weapon systems available to our ground forces in this area. This film will portray and evaluate concepts which would help achieve the primary mission of NATO forces, a successful defense in Europe.
Warsaw Pact nations are capable of employing heavily armored forces against the NATO alliance in Europe. Soviet doctrine stresses that the offense will be conducted from the march by fast-moving tank and mechanized forces. These rapid, hard-hitting, round-the-clock attacks are coordinated with conventional rocket, air, and artillery fires. Small airborne and air-mobile forces may be employed in rear areas. It is estimated that the Warsaw Pact forces have over 20,000 tanks for operations against NATO forces. This represents an enemy tank superiority ratio of about 3 to 1. Their integrated weapons system includes medium and light artillery, medium tanks, air defense weapons, rockets, mortars, and small arms. It is assumed that an attack by the Warsaw Pact forces in Europe can occur through any of the historically established corridors of approach into Western Europe. These areas are watched closely by the Central Army Group, called CENTAG. Allied forces defending against this threat are 2 corps of the 7th U.S. Army and 2 West German corps. The mission of CENTAG is to engage and destroy the enemy as far to the east as possible while conducting a delaying action. The width of these sectors requires defending U.S. ground forces to cover as much as 4 times the normal frontage. Thus, mobile firepower to respond quickly and in force is considered vital to any realistic defense of these sectors. To strengthen the defensive capability of the U.S. forces against the threat, a concept has been developed for the employment of attack helicopters, possessing the capabilities of the AH-56A Cheyenne. These attack helicopters provide the ground combat commander with an added dimension in mobility, a highly responsive, fast reaction, mobile striking force capable of rapid contour flight across the terrain, unimpeded by natural and man-made obstacles. This mobility will make it possible to conduct an effective surprise attack against enemy armor at a time and place of the commander's choosing. Under this concept, attack helicopter units will be organic to a conceptual mechanized infantry division. The combat maneuver elements of the division are as follows: 4 mechanized infantry battalions, 3 tank battalions, an air cavalry attack battalion consisting of both attack and light observation helicopters, and a cavalry squadron. Divisional artillery provides fire support from 155 millimeter and 8-inch self-propelled howitzers. A Chaparral Vulcan self-propelled artillery battalion provides division air defense. The Air Cavalry Attack Battalion consists of 3 Air Cavalry Attack Companies and 1 headquarters and headquarters company. Each company has 3 attack platoons and 1 scout platoon. The conceptual battalion has a mix of 45 attack helicopters and 30 light observation helicopters. The attack helicopters are assigned on the basis of 15 per company and 5 per platoon. The light observation helicopters are assigned on the basis of 10 per company. This mix is tentative and will be examined in greater detail in future experiments and studies. In order to understand the tactics employed by attack helicopters in the following simulation, it is first necessary to realize the full capabilities of the AH-56A Cheyenne. The AH-56A is capable of acquiring and attacking enemy targets under conditions of darkness and limited visibility. It is equipped with an inertial guidance and navigational system, plus surveillance, target acquisition, and night observation equipment. It is responsive to data acquired by ground-based sensors and other intelligence and acquisition sources. This attack helicopter can execute 120-degree turns left or right from the line of fire after firing a TOW missile, or hover just above the crest of the hill while the gunner guides the missile to the target. The TOW missile can penetrate any known enemy armor at a maximum range of 3,000 meters with a time of flight of less than 15 seconds. Time of flight for a range of 2,000 meters is less than 8 seconds. The 30-millimeter cannon is capable of defeating lightly armored vehicles, including armored personnel carriers, with an effective range of 3,000 meters. This provides compatibility with the maximum range of the TOW missile. The doctrine, tactics, and techniques for the employment of these attack helicopters are applied in the following simulated combat situations. The situations are covering force, main defensive, and counter-attack actions. All tactical concepts portrayed in this film were confirmed by a computer-assisted war game using AH-56A attack helicopters. However, for the purpose of the film simulation, AH-1G Cobra attack helicopters are being used to represent the AH-56A Cheyenne. The situation is, aggressor forces are initiating a major offensive along the West German border. Their immediate objective is to destroy the integrity of U.S. forces in the Fulda Gap area and prevent reinforcement. This could permit the Warsaw Pact forces to hold key areas while negotiating political issues or continue the offense. Under conditions of reduced visibility, the leading element of the aggressor army is approaching the border. The Allied force deployed in the Fulda Gap is a U.S. Army Mechanized Infantry Division with an Organic Attack Helicopter Battalion. Initially, tactical air will have the primary mission of interdiction and gaining air superiority. Between 2030 and 2400 hours in late summer, the U.S. Mechanized Infantry Division deploys into field positions in response to a general alert order. A covering force is positioned well forward of the main body of the division. It consists of an armored cavalry squadron, self-propelled field artillery battalion, an engineer company, and a Chaparral Vulcan battery under the command of an assistant division commander. Its job is to cover the major avenues of approach, give early warning, and conduct delaying actions. A, B, and C troops of the Armored Cavalry Squadron are deployed across the division front. D Troop, the Air Cavalry Troop, provides aerial reconnaissance by employing air cavalry teams, each composed of 2 OH-6 light observation helicopters and 1 attack helicopter. 1 air cavalry team performs reconnaissance and security missions in each cavalry troop sector, thus extending the capability of the ground unit. The division commander places the Air Cavalry Attack Battalion under the operational control of the covering force commander, who directs that the battalion deploy forward, positioning 1 company in vicinity of each cavalry troop. At 0300 hours, a report is received from Corps surveillance aircraft that the aggressor tank columns are moving toward the West German border. By 0530 hours, the enemy columns are crossing the border along the entire division sector of responsibility. In order to illustrate the employment of the attack helicopter, The battle action will now focus on Sea Troop. The Air Cavalry Attack Company is in its forward assembly position, called a logger area, approximately 17 kilometers to the rear of Sea Troop, but well forward of the main defensive positions. CH-47 Chinook helicopters pre-position supplies at forward areas for use in refueling and rearming the helicopters. At 0600 hours, an air cavalry team continues to reconnoiter the forward area. The attack helicopter provides immediate fire protection to the scouts. The team sights an enemy tank column estimated to be at least battalion size. The lead element of this column has crossed the border. The air cavalry team does not have sufficient firepower to engage a target of this size. So it maintains a surveillance standoff range of about 2,000 meters, avoiding detection by flying nap of the earth. The air cavalry team reports the target with a recommendation to engage the enemy with attack helicopters. As a result, the Air Cavalry Attack Company is alerted for the attack. The commander of the Air Cavalry Attack Company briefs his operations officer. The platoon leaders are rapidly assembled for a mission briefing. Once the battle starts, all platoon leader briefings will be conducted over the radio. The scout platoon immediately proceeds to the target area. It's the job of the Air Cavalry team leader to recommend holding areas and initial attack positions for the Air Cavalry Attack Company. Scouts confirm this information and reconnoiter additional attack positions. The scouts then assume responsibility for the surveillance of the sector, and the Air Cavalry team proceeds to another area. Once the attack team start the attack, the scouts maneuver to positions where they can maintain surveillance of the battlefield. These positions are either to the rear or flanks of the attack helicopters, depending on the terrain. One platoon of Sea Troop occupies a delaying position along Route 84. As the enemy column comes into range of ground fires, the ground cavalry platoon leader gives the command to commence firing pre-planned artillery fires and his organic anti-tank weapons. He informs the attack platoon leaders that they are clear to commence their attack. All ground weapons will continue firing while the attack helicopters engage the enemy. Two platoons attack. One platoon, comprised of two light fire teams, attacks the head of the column from the flank and the front on a converging axis. The second platoon, comprised of one light fire team and one heavy fire team, attacks the center and rear of the column. These attacks are timed in such rapid succession as to seem simultaneous. One fire team crests the tree line of a hill and launches its TOW missiles on the column head from the flank. The second fire team crests another hill at the head of the enemy column and launches its missiles. This provides shock effect and confuses the enemy. The attack helicopter, by remaining at or below treetop level, is extremely difficult for the enemy to acquire either visually or by radar. As the battle progresses, suppressive fire can be placed on the target by one aircraft of each team, while the other launches TOW missiles, or one team suppresses while the second team launches missiles. The situation just shown will develop throughout the covering force sector. The terrain, number of targets, and number of attack helicopters employed at any one time will vary. However, the basic doctrine, tactics and techniques will remain constant. When the enemy forces deploy and return heavy anti-aircraft fire, the attack helicopters disengage. They use this time to refuel and rearm in preparation for re-engaging the enemy as often as he returns to march column formation.
Results of the covering phase of the war game revealed that the initial attack by the AH-56A Cheyennes resulted in 164 enemy tanks and 21 armored personnel carriers destroyed. This was accomplished at a cost of 19 Cheyennes and 6 scouts. Thus, the covering force zone, normally considered to be a delaying zone, in effect became a killing zone. 2 enemy divisions were rendered ineffective, causing a delay of 14 hours. Normal delay expected without attack helicopters is about 4 hours. The most significant fact to emerge in this phase of the action was the early decision to reinforce the covering force with the entire Air Cavalry Attack Battalion. No other current weapon system would have allowed the commander to destroy the enemy at this range, while retaining a capability to participate fully in the main defensive battle.
At 1800 hours, the covering force, having accomplished maximum delay, passes through the main defensive positions. Its attached units return to the parent unit control, and the armored cavalry squadron screens the division's left flank. Because of the extended frontage, the division commander places 1 air cavalry attack company under the operational control of each forward brigade to assist in covering the large gaps which exist between ground elements. New logger areas are selected in the brigade rear, near enough to friendly elements for mutual security. All available natural and artificial camouflage is used. The scout teams receive instructions while refueling and proceed to assigned sectors. Maneuvering forward of the main defensive positions, they maintain contact with the enemy and report that the forward elements of the aggressor forces are just east of the forward battalions. Two attack platoons scramble and are briefed en route by the scouts. Based on this information, the platoon leaders plan their attack. The battalion commander requests suppressive artillery fires on the enemy columns. Other ground forces also take the enemy under fire. The attack helicopters maneuver to engage the enemy. Since the pilot's attention is concentrated on maneuvering for attack, acquiring and striking targets, the scouts provide a degree of security. As the battle develops, the scouts observe that the attack helicopters are receiving fire. They inform the pilots, who begin evasive maneuvers and move to a different attack position. Using standoff tactics, one aircraft engages the air defense weapon while the lead aircraft launches its TOW missile at the tank. The wingman will engage from a distance of 3,000 meters with 30mm fires. As the lead aircraft maneuvers into position to engage the tank from a range of at least 2,000 meters. At 17:45 hours, an enemy tank column forces a breach in the brigade forward defensive positions. Although suffering heavy losses, the enemy is making rapid progress into the brigade sector. The company commander recommends that the 3rd Attack Platoon be committed at this time. The brigade commander concurs and directs all available suppressive fires on the enemy. Immediately after receipt of the order, the platoon is airborne. The platoon leader makes his initial attack with the platoon online to ensure maximum surprise.
With the commitment of the 3rd Platoon of the Air Cavalry Attack Company, the main defensive phase ends. During this phase, the attack helicopters provided the ground commander with the capability to respond quickly to the numerous small penetrations along the extended frontage. War game evaluation of this phase resulted in the destruction of 72 enemy tanks and 7 armored personnel carriers at a cost of 6 AH-56A Cheyennes. The mobility, firepower, and responsiveness of the attack helicopters was the key to the main defensive action. Operational control of helicopter teams by battalion commanders resulted in highly effective coordination between ground companies and platoons. The brigade commander was able to switch the attack helicopter teams quickly to the most critical points of the action. However, this should not be considered as an on-call weapon system. Rather, it is a system which maneuvers, acquires the target using information from all other sources, and then destroys that target.
By 2100 hours, the entire division front is under heavy pressure. The enemy forces, with their superior number of tanks, have made multiple penetrations. All the attack helicopters supporting the left flank brigade have been committed. The ground forces, reinforced by these attack helicopters, are successful in holding the shoulders of the penetration, but it is estimated that 2 enemy battalions are now located within the penetration. Reduced visibility at night requires the attack helicopters to increase altitude and reduce speed. The darkness affords them concealment from visually controlled fires. However, electronic countermeasures must be used against enemy radar-controlled weapon systems. Night vision devices used in the AH-56A Cheyenne give it a near all-weather capability. Its firepower equates to the tank, yet its mobility far exceeds any ground system. In effect, the AH-56A Cheyenne provides the ground commander with a highly responsive weapon system available 24 hours a day. The brigade commander estimates that he can contain the enemy for approximately 1 hour. He requests the release of the reserve tank battalion located in his sector, and this is approved. The division commander then commits the 3rd Air Cavalry Attack Company against the penetration. He also orders the reserve brigade to move into blocking positions west of the penetration. The brigade will require at least 2 hours to move to those positions, compared to 10 minutes required by the attack helicopter. Without this means of rapid response, the ground commander would not be able to blunt the penetration while his ground forces maneuver into position. Upon receipt of the division commander's order, the Air Cavalry Attack Company is scrambled. Simultaneously, the reserve brigade begins its movement. The Air Cavalry Attack Battalion commander provides the company commander with a detailed briefing on the situation. All fires of both Air Cavalry Attack Companies are brought to bear upon the enemy force. ground unit commander controls all fires as he has done in the previous situations. The attack helicopters alternate their return to the rearming and refueling area. This enables the maximum number of attack helicopters to be available at any given time.
By 0400 hours of the following morning, the penetration has been stopped. The enemy columns have withdrawn and the original line of contact restored. The war game assessment of this action resulted in the loss of 50 enemy tanks and 3 armored personnel carriers. U.S. losses were 7 Cheyennes. An analysis of the counterattack action clearly indicated that the attack helicopter was the decisive factor in this battle. It was, in fact, the division commander's only means of applying combat power against enemy armor in a timely and decisive manner. Had it not been for the mobility differential achieved through the Cheyenne, the enemy penetration could not have been stopped. Total enemy armored vehicle losses for all 3 phases of the battle numbered 47 for ground weapon systems and 319 for the attack helicopter. 32 attack helicopters and 6 scouts were lost. This represents a loss ratio of 10 enemy vehicles to 1 AH-56A. In conclusion, the attack helicopter, when employed in conjunction with the main battle tank and other supporting weapon systems, provides the ground commander with a highly lethal, day and night, anti-armor capability. The attack helicopter will permit the Army to exploit new and exciting operational concepts for success on future battlefields.
Air assault artillery raid's a high-risk concept. But in this case, the nature of the target justifies the risk. Charlie Battery Commander, make best use of the rehearsal time you have available. Let the S-3 know when you're ready to go. Let's have a good raid. Air assault.
Deployment of artillery beyond the flot to mass fire on enemy targets outside the range of unit positions is an offensive operational tactic that dates back to the 17th century, when Sweden's Gustavus Adolphus's winged guns wreaked havoc during the 30 Years' War. During our own War of Independence, 18 pieces of artillery were ferried across the Delaware River during George Washington's Christmas Eve assault on Trenton, New Jersey. Another American military commander who effectively used the artillery raid as an offensive operational tactic was the Confederate Army's John Singleton Mosby. On orders from Jeb Stuart, Mosby's infamous Northern Virginia Rangers swiftly moved a howitzer to Warrenton Junction to attack and plunder a Federal Army transport train. Almost 100 years later, during World War II, Russian gunners employed a tactic called the artillery offensive. This would involve moving guns into enemy territories to conduct massed fire missions. During the Vietnam War, military aviation enabled American artillery to extend firepower into remote areas. Thus deployed, the guns were able to mass fires on enemy units, base areas, and cache sites theretofore beyond the range of artillery at fixed-fire bases. Operations were conducted as rapidly as possible to achieve surprise and to take full advantage of air mobility. Today, this operational tactic is known as the Air Assault Artillery Raid. It is one of the key offensive tactics being employed by light forces. The tactic can employ Chinook helicopters to lift artillery to the fire mission site. With the M1908 howitzer in an external mode, or the M102 105mm either externally or internally loaded. The raid can also employ Black Hawk helicopters with the M102. The Air Assault Artillery Raid should not be confused with the deliberate movement of an artillery unit by air to support a maneuver unit conducting a raid. The artillery is deployed for a specific attack mission. Target movement and new intelligence may cause adjustments in the mission, but units involved in an air assault artillery raid are not answerable to calls of fire based on a traditional support role. Because of the extreme risk associated with the air assault artillery raid, the executing unit should be given reasonable warning of the mission so that it can conduct the essential planning, coordination, and, if possible, mission rehearsals. It is an operational tactic that should be put to use only after all other offensive alternatives have been considered.
Romeo 25, send line 1 of the red line report, over.
During a state of war, the decision to conduct an air assault artillery raid is usually made at the division level.
Romeo 325, 678.
Division level decision makers are responsible for identifying targets, detailing the target defeat criteria, and determining the time and duration of the attack.
Morning, sir. Morning, Lynn. How are you?
Good.
Been up at division and they gave me these. They've identified a lucrative target in the mangrove area of West Santa. The target is a heavily defended headquarters. It's well beyond artillery range and is suitable for an air assault artillery raid.
How many aircraft have been allocated for the raid?
The old man's going to give you up to 6 Chinooks. As you can see, it's a very important mission to him.
I take it this has something to do with the medevac chopper we lost in that region last week?
Sure does. G2 has confirmed that these are the guys that planned and orchestrated that raid. What we need to do is to penetrate deep into this area so that we can fire onto the target up here. The old man really doesn't have any other options to attack that target. He's done a risk analysis and feels like it's worth the risk. Here's the photos and other information you're going to need in your preparation. Do you have any questions?
No, I'd like to review the packet, and then I'll get back.
Okay, best of luck to you. That's all.
Party commander's coming in this morning. We need to have the colonel here.
Boss Eagle, sir.
Air assault. Give me the S2, the S3, and the Charlie Battery Commander. We got a raid to do. Give this packet to the S3 when he comes in.
Air assault, sir.
Air assault. We've been given the mission to do an air assault artillery raid.
During the
objective is
briefing
enemy
to his
command
staff,
post in the
the
mangrove
battalion
region.
commander identifies the target, the target
The enemy
defeat
command post
criteria,
is probably
and other
responsible
mission
for shooting
details
down
set
that
forth by
chopper.
division headquarters.
Command post is heavily fortified and defended by aerial defense artillery weapons. It's beyond
The
range of
battalion
conventional
commander will
artillery.
also designate his mission commander.
Charlie Battery Commander, you're the mission commander.
This individual will assume total command during the actual execution of the raid. Typically, the mission commander is the commander of the raid's firing battery.
En route to this to meet the false insertion requirements. Charlie Battery, your takeoff time is not later than 1600. I want the target neutralized not later than 1700 hours.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
What is the radius of the target?
Intel reports that say 200 meters with 75-meter target location error.
Operational planning of the air assault artillery raid originates with the target defeat criteria and then works backwards. The raid operations officer will use the graphic munitions effects table to calculate the rounds needed.
5mm tubes, firing 1/8 HE rounds, 1/8 ICM rounds, and 6 WP for a total load of 7 rounds per tube.
Check.
Once the operations officer has determined the number of firing tubes and corresponding lift aircraft required for the successful completion of the mission, he does a map analysis to identify ideal pickup zones, landing zones, lagering areas, and false insertion sites. His decisions are guided by the number of aircraft involved in the mission and the firing range of the guns.
The landing zone is an abandoned airfield that we'll use as the logger site.
Our mission today is to conduct an air assault raid to neutralize a command post at grid 353580.
The Battalion S3 will conduct the air mission brief. The brief includes the mission overview, artillery and aviation assets to be used, target and threat identification and analysis, staging, pickup, and departure times.
1530. The advance party will lift off at 1600. The main body at 1605.
The S3 will point out the pickup zone, flight route, false insertion sites, landing zones, both primary and alternate, and lagering areas.
The logger site will be at grid Delta Romeo 343627. It's this abandoned airfield. Codes. The abort code.
The S3 will provide radio frequencies, call signs, and code words for the raid.
Hot LZ. Key box. Our drop dead time is
He will also designate the Air Mission Commander.
Command and
He
control.
will be in charge of all aviation assets for the raid.
The Air Mission Commander is Lieutenant Resnick. Challenging passport in effect for today is Cadet Diet. The time now, in 10 seconds, will be 1423 local. Are there any questions?
The battalion commander issues his final orders at this time.
Is there any additional comments?
Air assault artillery raid's a high-risk concept. But in this case, the nature of the target justifies the risk. Charlie Battery Commander, make best use of the rehearsal time you have available. Let the S3 know when you're ready to go. Let's have a good raid. Air assault.
All right, Charlie Battery, we've got an air assault mission. This represents our landing zone at grid Delta Romeo 410.
Following the air mission briefing, the mission commander returns to his battery to brief key personnel involved in any phase of the ground activity. This would include the battery XO, chief of firing battery, gunnery sergeant, section chiefs, and FDC chief.
Mills. FDC, I want you to compute data before we leave for 3 rounds of ICM, 3 rounds of HE, 1 round of WP. Maximum charge.
During the mission commander's briefing, he will ensure that every leader on the ground understands his responsibilities, understands how the mission is to be conducted, and the purpose of the mission. Simplicity is the key.
40 seconds. After they've been laid,
the mission commander will often use a sand table to illustrate the terrain at the landing zone, the howitzer configurations, and how the ground personnel will conduct the mission once they leave the helicopters.
As soon as the main body has been extracted, the trail party will close in the perimeter, and again, the trail party birds will land approximately this location, and those aircraft will take off directly behind the main body.
Load time will be 15:30.
While the mission commander briefs his ground forces, the air mission commander will brief his aviation assets. In this case, the crews of 6 Chinooks, 2 Black Hawk helicopters, and 2 Cobras.
Formation will be echelon right. The LZ will be located at Delta Romeo 410508. Once again, primary frequency is
Flight formation to and from the LZ are explained in detail, as well as the landing formations, landing direction, and lead aircraft designations.
DZ will be 300 degrees. The logger site will be at Delta Romeo 395, 385. Okay, Lieutenant Vish, you'll be flight lead for first flight. Mr. Taylor, you'll be flight lead for second flight.
Advance Party Blackhawks and Cobra gunships depart for the landing zone. Timing the departures of the various aviation assets is critical. A false insertion is conducted en route. Following this maneuver, the Cobras move out ahead of the Blackhawks. This enables the Cobras to scout the LZ for signs of enemy activity. Prepares for liftoff approximately 5 minutes after the advance party has left. Speed and stealth en route to mission insertion will help to achieve the essential element of surprise. As a deception measure, the main body will execute a false insertion along the lift route. Another method of deception is a false insertion at an intermediate LZ with the howitzers externally slung. The guns are set down, internally loaded, and flown to the actual raid site, creating the impression that the howitzers have been left at the false insertion site. In addition to the tactical benefits to be derived from delivering unexpected artillery rounds on enemy targets well beyond the range of fixed gun positions, the air assault artillery raid offers the advantage of minimizing the exposure of friendly troops and aircraft to the target itself, allowing delivery of varied munitions on the target and enabling the firing of large volumes of ordnance. Blackhawks bearing the mission commander and his advance party remain at the landing zone only long enough to deliver their passengers. After unloading, they fly to the nearby loggering area and await the mission commander's coded signal for an extraction.
This is Charlie 26, be advised, you're the same, over. Communication with the FO, sir.
Members of the advance party perform their appointed tasks. In the event of a hot LZ, a coded warning would have been relayed to the main body and an immediate extraction would have taken place. The mission commander must then decide whether to use the alternate LZ or abort the mission. 5 minutes have elapsed since the advance party has landed. Now, the main body approaches. Once the main body has arrived, the position should be considered compromised. Speed in the execution of the mission and the follow-on extraction is essential for survival of the force.
Number 4, adjust, aim point assessment. Number 4, aiming point identified. Number 4, deflection, 5-4, 9 or 5. Number 4, deflection, 5-4, 9 or 5.
5-4, 9 or 5, 1 mil.
4, 1 mil, ready for recheck. Number 4, deflection, 5-4, 9 or 5, split. 0 mils, number 4 is laid.
Fire for effect.
The forward observer party, which has rappelled into an observation post, begins transmitting target information to confirm pre-computed firing data.
354
578.
578 over.
Enemy CP.
Enemy CP over.
Roger, 587. We revving our tank?
Ready.
The raised hand is a signal that the howitzer is prepared to conduct a fire mission.
We're on target. Golf 19er.
This is Victor 5-0. We have a Mad Dog, over.
This is Golf 19er. Mad Dog, out.
Aircraft are inbound.
To expedite the extraction, the Chinooks depart the LZ externally slung. The mission commander makes a final check of the LZ to make certain that it is clean. He is duty-bound to remain in the area until all of his ground forces are accounted for.
Delta 3-6, this is Victor 5-0. I need fire support to my southwest, over.
Delta 3-6, affirmative. I'm engaging at this time, over.
The Department of Defense has made a service-wide effort to improve its ability to engage effectively in any potential low to mid-intensity conflict. These improvements have affected equipment, manpower, tactics, and training. The offensive operational tactic known as the Air Assault Artillery Raid has received renewed attention from American military tacticians because of its viability in such conflicts. Though risky, a well-planned, coordinated, and properly executed air assault artillery raid has a practical application in the low to mid-intensity battlefield.